Family went missing during mountain trip. 3 weeks later a wildlife camera captures this. A family of 4 vanished during a mountain trip, presumed victims of a tragic hiking accident. But 3 weeks later, a wildlife camera captures something that makes everyone question what really happened, revealing a truth so sinister no one could have imagined. The wind whistled across Glacier National Park, Montana, carrying with it the promise of another cold front. Eleanor Whitaker, known to most as Ellie, stepped off the gondola, her weathered hiking boots crunching against the snowpacked trail. At 67, her steps were measured but confident, the gait of someone who had traversed these mountains for decades. Her eyes, still sharp despite the years, scanned the foggy mountain path ahead. The visibility was poor, but that didn't concern her. She knew these trails better than most, had walked them, taught on them, rescued people from them for over 30 years as a park ranger and wilderness survival instructor. She adjusted her backpack and made her way toward the cabin-style lodge that served as a waypoint for hikers. Its wooden structure stood resolute against the mountainside, smoke curling from the chimney. As she dropped her heavy pack in the foyer, stamping snow from her boots, a familiar face looked up from behind the counter. "Miss Whitaker." The local clerk's face brightened with recognition. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." "Hello, Tom," Ellie acknowledged, her voice carrying the weight of her purpose. Tom leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Any news about your family?" Ellie shook her head, lines deepening around her eyes. To most visitors, she was Eleanor the Old Ranger, a legend among the park staff and regular hikers. Her reputation for leading women's survival retreats in retirement had only enhanced the respect she'd earned during her 3 decades of service. "Not yet," she replied, unzipping her coat. "That's why I'm back." Tom nodded solemnly. Everyone in town knew about the Whitaker family tragedy. Daniel, Ellie's son, along with his wife Rachel and their twin girls, Ivy and Wren, had been missing for nearly a month now. What started as a routine weekend hike had turned into every family's nightmare. Ellie pulled out a stack of missing person posters from her pack. The top one showed a smiling family of 4, Daniel in his stocky green hoodie, Rachel with her warm smile, and the twins, Ivy in bright yellow and Wren in purple, their matching grins revealing identical gaps where baby teeth had fallen out. "I was hoping to put these up, replace the old ones," she said, holding the stack out slightly, around the lodge and at the trailheads. "Of course," Tom replied without hesitation. "Anything to help." The manager already approved it. "He said to tell you if there's anything else we can do, just ask." "Thank you," Ellie said, grateful for the kindness that had been shown to her throughout this ordeal. As she moved through the lodge, pinning posters to bulletin boards and near entrances, Ellie couldn't help but replay the events of that day in her mind. It had been a typical Saturday morning when Daniel called, inviting her to join their hike. "Come on, Mom," he'd said, his voice playful over the phone. The girls have been asking for their Grandma Ellie stories all week. She'd wanted to go, had almost cancelled her other plans, but the charity event she'd committed to months before couldn't be rescheduled. It was a fundraiser for wilderness education for underprivileged youth, a cause close to her heart. Next time, she'd promised. "Take lots of pictures for me." And they had. Midday, as she was setting up displays at the charity event, her phone had buzzed with a message from Daniel. It was a perfect family portrait, the 4 of them smiling broadly against the backdrop of the mountains. She'd smiled, noting how they'd taken it at the same spot as always. Rachel had mentioned once that she wanted to create a time-lapse of sorts, showing how the girls grew up against the unchanging mountains. It had seemed like such a sweet, sentimental idea. Hours later, when the charity event had wrapped up and Ellie returned home, she noticed several missed calls from Daniel. There was a text message, too: "Weather turning bad up here. Cutting the hike short. Talk later." She tried calling him back immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. Rachel's phone did the same. At first, Ellie had told herself not to worry, cell service was notoriously spotty in parts of the park, but when evening came and they still hadn't returned, the worry solidified into fear. That night, she'd called the police. By morning, search parties were combing the most frequently used trails. Volunteers from the community showed up in droves, many who remembered Daniel from when he was a boy, trailing after his ranger mother on the safer paths. After a week of intense searching, with helicopters scanning from above and teams on foot below, the police had begun to voice what Ellie refused to accept. The likelihood of finding them alive is diminishing by the day, the search coordinator had said gently. Ms. Whitaker, we've covered every likely area at this point. With the weather systems that move through, I'm sorry, but we have to consider the possibility of a tragic accident. But Ellie knew her son. Daniel was experienced in these mountains, had grown up respecting their dangers. He would never have put his family at risk, would have read the weather signs, would have sought shelter or turned back before things got dangerous. Something else had happened, something beyond a simple hiking accident. Which is why, despite the police scaling back their search efforts, Ellie had returned to the mountain. If no one else would find her family, she would do it herself. As she stepped outside to post more flyers along the trailheads, her fingers stiffened in the cold. She secured each poster carefully, making sure they wouldn't be torn away by the wind. With each one, she thought of Daniel's last photo, the family smiling, unaware of what lay ahead. A young couple walked past, their gazes lingering on the poster before moving to Ellie's face with recognition and pity. She'd grown accustomed to those looks over the past weeks, but pity wouldn't find her family. Determination would. With the posters secured at the main trailhead, Ellie stared up at the mountain, its peak obscured by clouds. Somewhere up there, the answers waited, and she would find them no matter what. Ellie continued her methodical posting of the missing person flyers along the hiking trail, stopping hikers as they passed to ask if they'd seen her family. Each conversation followed the same pattern, sympathetic eyes, shaking heads, mumbled hopes for a happy ending. After the 20th "no, sorry," Ellie had almost resigned herself to another day of disappointment. Then, as she secured a flyer to a trail marker about 2 miles up, a figure emerged from between the trees to her right. A man in his 50s, dressed in camouflage with an orange safety vest, approached her with purposeful strides. "Excuse me," he called out, his breath visible in the cold air. "Mind if I take one of those?" Ellie turned, studying him. He had the weathered look of someone who spent more time outdoors than in, a thick beard peppered with gray and alert eyes that seemed to catalog everything around him. "Of course," she replied, handing him a flyer. "Name's Cal Jennings," he said, extending a gloved hand. "Local hunter, been coming to these mountains for 30 years. Ellie shook his hand. "Eleanor Whitaker, friends call me Ellie." Recognition flashed in his eyes. "The ranger. Heard a lot about you over the years. Respect what you've done for the park." Cal studied the flyer intently, his brow furrowing. "When did you say they went missing?" 3 weeks ago. Almost a month now." Cal reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small device. "You know, I think I should check something. I've got trail cameras set up for tracking game movements." Ellie's pulse quickened. "You think you might have caught something?" "Maybe. Worth looking." Cal manipulated the device's screen, scrolling through what appeared to be a series of photos and video clips. His movements became slower, more deliberate as he focused on particular segments. "What is it?" Ellie asked, unable to contain her hope. "Did you see something?" Cal didn't answer immediately. Instead, he continued reviewing footage, occasionally glancing between the screen and the flyer in his hand. Then he stopped, his finger hovering over the display. "Miss Whitaker, I think you should see this." He turned the device toward her. The footage was grainy, the forest around it shrouded in mist, but Ellie's heart nearly stopped when 3 figures moved across the frame. A woman with shoulder-length hair and 2 small children, all moving with evident caution through the underbrush. The woman wore a light-colored jacket, coral or pink, while the children were dressed in yellow and lavender. "That's them," Ellie whispered, her voice catching. "That's Rachel and the twins." Cal nodded, his expression grave. I thought it might be. Look at the timestamp. The date in the corner of the screen showed that the footage had been captured just 3 days ago. 3 days? Ellie's voice rose with disbelief and renewed hope. They're alive. But where's Daniel? My son should be with them. Cal zoomed in as much as the footage quality would allow. This is a fixed camera. It only captures what passes directly in front of it. Your son could have been walking behind them, or he might have taken a different route. There's no way to tell from just this. Ellie stared at the frozen image, drinking in the sight of her family. They looked worn and shaken, moving with the cautious steps of those navigating unfamiliar terrain. At one point, they had turned slightly toward the camera but didn't seem to notice it, likely well hidden for its intended purpose of tracking wildlife undetected. Where exactly was this taken? Ellie asked, urgency in her voice. Cal pulled up a GPS map on his device. Here, he pointed to a marked location. It's deep in the northern section, about 8 miles from where we're standing now. The terrain gets rough up there. Lots of unmarked ravines, unstable slopes. Ellie studied the map, realization dawning. That's outside the search zone. The police never went that far north because they said it was too dangerous. No maintained trails, high avalanche risk after the storms we had. Exactly. Not somewhere a family with young children would typically venture. Which is why no one thought to look there, Ellie concluded. Cal, I need a copy of this footage. I need to show it to the police immediately. Cal nodded, already working on transferring the file. I can email it to you right now. And here, he scribbled on a small notepad, is my number. Call me if you need anything else. I know those northern reaches pretty well. Thank you, Ellie said, her voice thick with emotion. This is the first real lead we've had in weeks. I hope it helps, Cal replied. And I hope you find them safe. As they finished the file transfer, Cal checked his watch. I need to head back down. Getting late, and I've got what I came for already. He gestured to his hunting pack. Will you be all right? Yes, Ellie said, clutching her phone with the precious footage. I'm going back to my cabin to call the police right away. They walked together toward the lodge, the path easier to navigate going downhill. Ellie's mind raced with renewed possibilities. Her family was alive, at least as of 3 days ago. The police would have to restart the search now. They'd have to look in areas they'd previously dismissed. When they reached the lodge, Cal tipped his hat to her. Remember, call if you need anything. Good luck, Miss Whitaker. Thank you, Cal, Ellie replied, watching as he headed toward the parking area. She turned and hurried toward her rented cabin, new determination in every step. For the first time in weeks, she felt something beyond grief and desperation. She felt hope. The moment Ellie entered her cabin, she pulled out her phone and dialed the police department. Her fingers trembled slightly as she navigated to the saved contact for Detective Marshall, the lead officer on her family's case. Detective Marshall speaking, came the prompt answer. This is Eleanor Whitaker, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I found evidence that my family is alive. There was a brief pause before the detective responded. What kind of evidence, Miss Whitaker? Video footage from a trail camera. It shows Rachel and the twins moving through the forest just 3 days ago. Ellie explained the encounter with Cal Jennings and the location where the footage had been captured. I'm sending you the video now, she continued, pulling up her email. You need to see this, detective. We need to restart the search immediately. As Marshall reviewed the footage, Ellie paced the small cabin, glancing occasionally at the window, where daylight was already beginning to fade. It was nearly 4 p.m., and this time of year, darkness fell quickly in the mountains. This does appear to be your daughter-in-law and granddaughters, Marshall conceded after a moment. However, Miss Whitaker, we can't begin a search operation this late in the day. What do you mean? Ellie demanded. They're out there right now. I understand your urgency, Marshall replied, his tone measured. But as a former park ranger, you know better than anyone the dangers of nighttime search operations in this terrain. The area you're describing is particularly treacherous. Ellie moved to the window, watching as park rangers were already guiding day hikers back down the mountain trails. Dark clouds were gathering above the peaks, promising more snow. The forecast is calling for another snowfall tonight, Marshall continued. We can't risk sending teams into unmarked territory with limited visibility and deteriorating conditions. We'd only be creating more potential victims. As much as it pained her, Ellie knew he was right. She had conducted enough rescue operations herself to understand the protocols and the reasoning behind them. What about helicopters? She asked, grasping at alternatives. Not in these conditions, and certainly not at night, Marshall replied. Additionally, from what I can see in this footage, they don't appear to be in immediate distress. They're moving purposefully, not like people who are critically injured or lost. Ellie sank into a chair, struggling with the frustration of knowing her family was so close, yet still unreachable. So, we wait until morning. First light, Marshall confirmed. I'll coordinate with the park authorities tonight. We'll assemble teams and plan the safest approach to that area. Miss Whitaker, I promise you we will do everything possible to find them tomorrow. I understand, she said reluctantly. But I want to be part of the search team. Given your experience, I think that can be arranged. Just be at the ranger station by 6 a.m. After ending the call, Ellie sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the frozen image of Rachel and the twins on her phone. They were alive, but something wasn't right. Where was Daniel? Why hadn't he been with them on the camera footage? Cal's explanation that Daniel might have been out of frame or taking a different route made logical sense. But Ellie knew her son. He would never have separated from his family in remote, dangerous terrain, especially with the twins. He was too protective, too cautious. And why were they in that specific area to begin with? It was far off the trails they usually took, in a zone known to be dangerous even for experienced hikers. Daniel wouldn't have led his family there without a compelling reason. The questions multiplied, offering no answers, only deepening her concern. Ellie stood and moved to the window again, watching as the last light faded from the sky and the first snowflakes began to fall. Somewhere up there in the growing darkness, her family was facing another night alone in the wilderness. Hold on, she whispered, her breath fogging the cold glass. Just hold on until morning. As evening settled over the mountain, Ellie's cabin felt increasingly claustrophobic. The walls seemed to close in, and the silence amplified the anxious thoughts whirling through her mind. Despite the warmth from the small fireplace, a chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since breakfast. Looking at her watch, 6:30 p.m., Ellie decided to join the communal dinner at the lodge's main hall. Being alone with her thoughts tonight would only feed her anxiety. She bundled up against the cold and made her way across the courtyard toward the main building. The snowfall had intensified, large flakes drifting down in the glow of the outdoor lamps. The trails were completely empty now, every sensible hiker had returned to safety hours ago. As she approached the lodge, she could see a group gathered around the large stone fireplace in the central hall. The sound of conversation and the occasional laugh filtered through the glass doors. It felt painfully normal, another evening in the mountains for most of these people, while her world remained upended. Pushing through the doors, Ellie felt the immediate rush of warmth and the smell of food. Heads turned as she entered, conversations faltering momentarily before resuming with forced casualness. She'd grown accustomed to being the subject of whispers over the past weeks. She took a cup of hot water from the drink station and pulled an instant noodle cup from her pocket. As she found a seat at the edge of the gathering, not quite part of it, but not completely separate either, she became aware of two men talking nearby. They were about her age, perhaps a little older, their voices lowered but still audible in the momentary lulls of the larger conversation. "That's Eleanor Whitaker, isn't it?" one of them said. "The millionaire woman." Yeah, the other replied. What a shame. Donates all that money to the Wilderness Education Foundation last month and now her family's missing. Karma can be cruel. If it were my family, the first man continued, unaware that Ellie could hear every word, I'd be out there searching right now, storm be damned. 100%. Well, she's just a woman, and she's doing this alone, the other replied, not unkindly. Can't be easy at her age. Ellie stared into her cup of noodles, the steam rising to warm her face, which had gone rigid with suppressed emotion. The conversations around her continued, most people giving her respectful space, some nodding politely when they caught her eye, but she couldn't focus on anything except those words echoing in her head, I'd be out there searching right now. Storm be damned. Would Daniel wait until morning if it were her missing on the mountain? The answer came immediately, no, he wouldn't rest until he found her. With renewed resolve, Ellie finished just enough of her meal to stave off hunger, then quietly slipped away from the gathering. No one seemed to notice her departure as she made her way back to her cabin. Once inside, she moved with purpose. From her bags, she pulled out her most reliable hiking gear, equipment that had seen her through countless wilderness challenges. Thermal layers, waterproof outer shell, reinforced boots. Her old search and rescue pack, still meticulously organized with emergency supplies, a first aid kit, and survival tools. She checked her GPS device, ensuring she had both online maps and offline backups loaded. Cal's coordinates were already marked. She packed extra batteries, energy bars, and her sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures. As she worked, a small voice of caution whispered that she was being reckless. The police and park rangers would be searching at first light. She was 67 years old, facing treacherous terrain in worsening weather. But a stronger voice, the voice that had guided her through 3 decades of wilderness rescue, reminded her that every hour mattered in survival situations. And if there was anyone who could safely navigate these mountains in adverse conditions, it was her. With her pack secured, Ellie slipped out of her cabin, carefully avoiding the main paths where she might be seen. The snow was falling more heavily now, already accumulating on the ground. She pulled her headlamp from her pocket but kept it off for now, not wanting to draw attention as she moved past the dimly lit cabins. Once she reached the trailhead, she paused to orient herself. According to Cal's GPS coordinates, she needed to head northwest, away from the maintained trails and into the less traveled wilderness. It would be a challenging hike, even in daylight. In the growing darkness and snowfall, it would test every skill she possessed. But her family was out there, and she was going to find them. Ellie switched on her headlamp, took a deep breath of the cold mountain air, and began her ascent. The snow crunched beneath her boots, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. With each step, the sounds of the lodge faded behind her, replaced by the whisper of snow and wind through the pines. The terrain grew steeper, the path less distinct. By the time she had hiked 2 hours, the snow was falling so heavily that her visibility was reduced to just a few feet ahead. Time seemed to lose meaning as she pushed forward, checking her GPS regularly to ensure she stayed on course. As the hours passed, the temperature plummeted further. The wind picked up, driving the snow horizontally, stinging any exposed skin. Ellie's lips began to feel numb, her fingers stiff despite her insulated gloves. The realization dawned on her that she was approaching her limits. If the conditions worsened any further, she would have no choice but to find shelter and wait out the storm. Just as she was considering her options for setting up an emergency camp, a faint glow caught her eye through the curtain of snow. At first, she thought it might be a trick of light or her own exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. But as she moved cautiously forward, the glow resolved into what unmistakably appeared to be a window, light spilling from a structure nestled among the trees. A cabin. In this remote section of wilderness, someone had built a cabin. Hope surged through Ellie's tired body. If nothing else, it offered shelter from the increasingly dangerous storm. At best, it might hold answers about her family. She approached carefully, her headlamp illuminating a small, sturdy structure partially protected by the surrounding pines. Smoke curled from a chimney, confirming that someone was inside. With trembling hands, from cold or anticipation, she couldn't tell, Ellie knocked on the wooden door. No response came. She knocked again, louder this time, and called out, "Hello, is anyone there? Please, I need help." Several long moments passed in silence. Then, just as she was about to knock a third time, the door creaked open. Ellie found herself staring into a face she had seen only in photographs and missing person posters for the past 3 weeks. Rachel stood in the doorway, her expression frozen in shock. For a heartbeat, neither woman moved. Then Rachel seemed to snap out of her stunned state and rushed forward, pulling Ellie inside. "Ellie, how? What are you doing here?" Rachel stammered, helping her mother-in-law shed her snow-covered outer layer. Before Ellie could respond, small voices called from deeper in the cabin. "Mom, who is it?" Two small figures peered from behind a wooden chair frame. Ivy and Wren, their eyes widening as they recognized their grandmother. "Grandma Ellie," they cried in unison, rushing forward but stopping short, suddenly shy or uncertain. Ellie sank to her knees, overcome by emotion and exhaustion. The warmth of the cabin's fire began to thaw her frozen extremities, sending painful tingles through her hands and feet. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the flood of relief at seeing her granddaughters alive. Rachel moved quickly to the small kitchen area, returning with a steaming mug. "Here, drink this. You're half frozen." As Ellie sipped the warm liquid, reconstituted powdered milk, she realized, Rachel ushered the twins back toward their makeshift bed. "It's late, girls. Back to bed now. Grandma Ellie is tired and needs to warm up. You both can talk to her tomorrow." Reluctantly, the twins shuffled over to a small bed in the corner, curling up together beneath a thick blanket. Rachel handed them each a cup of milk, and after they eagerly gulped down the white liquid, she tucked them in with practiced ease, murmuring something that drew soft giggles before they finally settled. "Good night, Grandma Ellie," Ivy said, her voice soft. Wren echoed the words a moment later, already mid-yawn, her eyes half-closed. One of the girls drifted off almost immediately, which surprised Ellie. Soon after, their breathing evened out, soft and steady. The warmth of the blanket and the comfort of each other's presence seemed to dissolve the day's weariness, leaving them peaceful and still. As the initial shock began to wear off, questions flooded Ellie's mind. But the most pressing one pushed its way to her lips first. "Rachel," she said quietly, keeping her voice low enough not to carry to the twins, "where's Daniel?" Rachel's face fell at the mention of Daniel's name. She moved to the small wooden table in the center of the cabin and sank into a chair, gesturing for Ellie to join her. Ellie lowered herself into the chair opposite Rachel, still warming her hands around the mug. The cabin was simple but sturdy, a single room with a kitchen area, the small bed the twins shared, and a leather sofa. A small wood stove provided both heat and a cooking surface, and shelves along one wall held supplies, canned goods, bottled water, basic tools. "Rachel," Ellie pressed, "what happened? Where is my son?" she asked again. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She stared down at her own mug, turning it slowly between her palms before answering. "We had an accident," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "That day we went hiking. We didn't check the weather forecast properly. We ended up caught in that terrible snowstorm 3 weeks ago." "But why were you up here?" Ellie asked, struggling to keep her voice calm. "This area is marked as dangerous on all the park maps. Daniel knows better than to bring children into this zone." Rachel bit her lip. "He wanted to try something different. We've been hiking the same trails for years, and the girls were getting bored. He thought we'd just explore a little ways into the less traveled areas, stay on the lower slopes where it's safer. But then the storm hit so suddenly. Going back seemed more dangerous than pressing forward." She paused, wiping at her eyes. "We were lucky to find this cabin. It saved our lives that first night. Ellie nodded, understanding how a shelter in such conditions would have been a godsend. But she still didn't have her answer. "And Daniel?" she prompted. Rachel's face crumpled, and for a moment she couldn't speak. When she finally found her voice again, it was broken with grief. The next morning, when the snow had let up a little, Daniel said he would hike out to get help. He thought if he could reach an area with cell service or find a park ranger. Her voice trailed off. I waited. Hours turned into a day. Another storm moved in, worse than the first. I couldn't leave the girls alone to go looking for him. "Did you ever find him?" Ellie asked, her throat tight with dread. Rachel shook her head, tears now flowing freely. "No. After the second storm passed, I tried to search nearby, but with the twins, I couldn't go far. And then more bad weather came. We've been trapped here, waiting for conditions to improve enough to try making it back to the main trails." Ellie's heart felt as though it was being squeezed in a vice. "So, Daniel is," she couldn't finish the sentence. "I don't know for certain," Rachel admitted. "But it's been 3 weeks. I've had to accept that she covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. After a moment, Ellie asked the question that had been nagging at her since she arrived. "Do the girls know?" Rachel lowered her hands, composing herself with visible effort. "They did, eventually. They're smart, always asking questions. By the second week, they knew something was very wrong. I had to tell them that Daddy might not be coming back." Ellie glanced toward the small bed where her granddaughters slept, their matching faces peaceful in the dim light of the cabin. The thought of them processing such devastating news broke her heart. "But why did you stay here?" Ellie asked, turning back to Rachel. "It's been 3 weeks. Surely there were breaks in the weather when you could have tried to make it back down." Rachel's expression grew haunted. "I was afraid. Maybe if it was just me, I might have risked it. But with the twins, after losing Daniel," she shook her head. "I couldn't bear the thought of something happening to them, too. So, we stayed, using the supplies we found here." Ellie rose from her chair, suddenly needing to move. She walked to the kitchen area and examined the shelves more closely. Most of the food was canned, beans, soups, vegetables, but there were also packages of dried meat and milk that looked relatively fresh. "These supplies," Ellie said, picking up one of the milk boxes. "They don't seem like they've been sitting here for years." "No," Rachel agreed. "I think someone uses this cabin regularly. A hunter, maybe. There's enough here to last us a while longer." Ellie set the milk down and moved to dispose of her empty mug. As she approached the small trash bin near the door, something caught her eye, a glint of metal beneath a loose floorboard. Crouching down, she examined the area more closely. "There's something under here," she murmured. Rachel quickly stood and moved toward her. "What is it?" Ellie worked her fingers into the gap between the boards and lifted. The floorboard came up easily, revealing a small space beneath. There, nestled in the dust, was a man's ring, a wedding band with a distinctive diamond inlay. Ellie's breath caught as she lifted it out. The ring was clean, unmarred by scratches or dirt one might expect if it had been lost beneath a floor for any length of time. "This is Daniel's wedding ring," she said, her voice hollow with disbelief. Rachel stared at it, her expression unreadable for a moment before she reached for it. "It must have slipped off his finger that first night," she said quickly. "We were all so cold, and our hands were numb. It probably fell through the crack without him noticing." Ellie handed her the ring, watching as Rachel slipped it onto her thumb for safekeeping. Something about the explanation didn't sit right, but Ellie couldn't articulate what exactly bothered her. She glanced around the cabin again, noting details she had missed before, the substantial pile of chopped firewood by the door, far more than one would expect for an abandoned cabin, the cabinet behind Rachel that was slightly ajar, revealing not just canned goods, but fresh supplies. "Rachel," Ellie said slowly, if this cabin is abandoned, why is there so much firewood? And those supplies, some of them look new. A flicker of something, alarm, guilt, crossed Rachel's face before she composed herself. I told you, I think someone uses it regularly. Maybe they've been by since we've been here and didn't see us. Didn't offer help. We hide when we hear anyone approaching, Rachel explained. After everything that's happened, I didn't know who to trust. Ellie nodded, but the explanation did little to settle the unease growing lethargy up. She turned back toward the kitchen area, intending to ask more questions, when a sudden movement caught her peripheral vision. In the split second before pain exploded across the back of her head, Ellie saw Rachel behind her, arms raised high, the butt of a hunting shotgun clutched in her hands. Then darkness claimed her. Consciousness returned to Ellie in painful fragments. First came the throbbing in her head, a steady pulse of agony that radiated from the base of her skull. Then the awareness of cold, her extremities felt numb despite the cabin's interior. Finally, the smell, something acrid and chemical that made her throat constrict. She forced her eyes open, blinking against the disorientation. The cabin was dark now, the fire reduced to embers that cast long shadows across the walls. Through the windows, she could see that the snowstorm had passed, leaving a clear night sky beyond the glass. When she tried to move, panic surged through her. Her arms and legs wouldn't respond. Looking down, she discovered why. She was bound to a wooden chair with rope, the bindings tight enough to cut into her skin. The smell grew stronger, making her cough. Gas. There was gas leaking in the cabin. Ellie's gaze darted around the room, searching for Rachel and the twins. The small bed in the corner was empty, the blankets thrown aside. No one else was in the cabin. The realization hit her with brutal clarity. Rachel had left her tied up in a cabin filling with gas, with a smoldering fire that would eventually catch and trigger an explosion. She meant for Ellie to die here. But why? The question burned as fiercely as the pain in her head, but Ellie knew she couldn't dwell on it now. Survival came first. She took stock of her situation. The ropes around her wrists were tight but not expertly tied. If she could create enough slack, she might be able to work her way free. The chair itself was old but sturdy, not easily broken. Ellie began rocking the chair, small movements at first, testing its stability. Each motion sent fresh waves of pain through her head, but she pushed through it. The gas smell was getting stronger by the minute. She didn't have the luxury of time. With a sudden lurch, she threw her weight sideways, toppling the chair onto its side. The impact jarred her injured head, sending stars across her vision, but she felt the chair crack slightly. Encouraged, she repeated the motion, slamming the chair against the floor again and again until one of the legs splintered. The broken leg created just enough give in the structure that Ellie could maneuver her bound hands toward her pocket. Her fingers, stiff with cold and restricted circulation, fumbled for several agonizing seconds before closing around what she sought, a small folding knife she always carried. Opening it one-handed while bound was a challenge that required every bit of dexterity she possessed. When the blade finally clicked into place, she began sawing at the ropes around her wrists, careful not to cut herself in the process. The gas smell was now overwhelming, making her head swim. Somewhere in the cabin, a small flame from the dying embers caught something. There was a soft whoosh as fire bloomed near the fireplace area. The rope around one wrist gave way just as the first flames began racing across the wooden floor toward the kitchen area. Ellie worked faster, freeing her other wrist and then quickly untying her ankles. Standing made her dizzy, but adrenaline propelled her forward. She stumbled to the door only to find it locked, whether with a key or by some external means, she couldn't tell. The fire was spreading rapidly now, consuming the aged wood with hungry efficiency. Grabbing one of the remaining firewood logs, Ellie approached the nearest window. The glass was old and single-paned, vulnerable, especially to a woman who had spent decades developing the physical strength required for wilderness survival. With a grunt of effort, she swung the log against the window. The glass cracked but held. A second blow shattered it, sending shards flying outward into the snow. Ellie used the log to clear the remaining glass from the frame, ignoring the cuts that opened on her hands as she worked. Behind her, the fire reached the kitchen. There was a terrifying moment when the flames made contact with the highest concentration of gas, a whoosh of air, and then a burst of intense heat that singed her hair and pushed her forward with its force. Ellie didn't hesitate. She climbed through the window, the sharp edges of broken glass catching on her clothing and cutting into her leg as she maneuvered through the tight space. She fell heavily into the snow outside, the cold a shocking contrast to the inferno behind her. Rolling away from the cabin, she watched as flames engulfed the structure. The warm glow that had seemed so welcoming hours ago now revealed itself as the deadly trap it had become.